Have you ever been called a band geek, a theater nerd, cyber dork, studio rat, gamer punk, orchestra dork, book monkey, drama jock, Poindexter, artsy fartsy, or just plain weird? Well then, welcome to Art Nerds. This is the podcast where we sit down with our nerdy friends, embrace our inner geek, and celebrate our art. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. This is Art Nerds. My name is Mike O'Brien, and this is where we talk to our nerdy friends about their artwork. Today, on the other side of the country with me today is an old friend of mine from college, and this is the one and only Mr. Robert Poe. How are you, Rob?
I'm great. Nice to see you, Mike. Or,
You
well,
too.
hear you, especially.
Yeah. So Rob and I met in college back in the late 80s. Is that right?
Yep, that would be correct.
And that way, and we've kind of lost touch, but we finally got back into touch. But anyway, Rob is here with us to brag about his art. Rob, what is your art?
Now we get down to it. Well, I guess the easiest way to say it is I've been doing a web series now for more than a decade called Space Hospital. And I would say that my art is digital in nature. I was always interested in animation as a kid and drawing and just a lot of different kinds of art. But of course, like a lot of kids, I watched too much television. I loved films and I studied theater right around the same time that you did. You left before I did at Eastern Illinois University. Mm-hmm. And studying acting at that point and studying theater was, for me, it was hopefully a way to get into acting. And then from there, I always had the plan of directing and writing and doing other, more things because I just always loved that medium. So my web series is, it's kind of a combination of just all the different things I like to do. It has puppets and it has animation and it has live action and sets and costumes and masks and corny sci-fi themes.
And it's brilliant. I got to watch it. And
well,
I mean that.
Thank you very much.
Genuinely. I mean, this is okay. First of all, I'll tell you, having come from Eastern and those guys who love Mamet and Tennessee Williams and the realistic stuff, I don't like realism. So watching your web series was just joy.
Yes. And it's not realistic. It's very much a sort of a holding up a mirror maybe to television and to media in general. And,
a little bit of pop culture in there as well.
I think a lot of pop culture sort of references, not always direct references, but sort of broad references.
Yeah, no, 'cause I watched a few episodes and it is this wonderful amalgam of, first of all, my mom was a soap opera fanatic back in the 70s. So it feels like a soap opera. It feels like kitsch.
Yeah.
And it's 70s sci-fi. Oh man, it's just brilliant. It's just clever as hell.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I love kitsch. And I knew, I created the show with a friend of mine that I met in Chicago, Sigurd Euland. And we met at Second City when we were both at the conservatory there studying improv. And we just had very similar sense of humor and also similar interests in that kind of kitschy, especially sort of late 60s, early 70s kind of stuff, television, especially TV, which is on some level just so corny and so surreal, but everyone's taking it so seriously,
I mean, that's the era we kind of grew up in, our formative years of
absolutely, yeah,
Batman and Scooby-Doo and
I think
kind of weird influences.
There was a time during the 60s where it was decided that the kids had control of the remote for whatever reason. And so in the 50s, it was sort of assumed that father was deciding what the family was going to watch together. And so everything was like father knows best. And, it was all sort of male centric and head of the household
Right. My
based.
Three Sons kind of stuff.
Right. And then when you got into 70s or the late 60s, especially, you started seeing that sort of Gilligan's Island and Green Acres and these very surreal kinds of departures, I think, from what people had really known to be a television show up to that point. And, and then, and soap operas that just went on,
Right.
forever, every day. And, I hated them as a kid, but I got to understand that language, I think, fairly well.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. And I'm not a television historian by any stretch, but that notion of who's got control of the TV, how that shifts so radically. Maybe radically, I don't know if it's the right word, but.
Well, it's amazing that shows like Green Acres or Gilligan's Island or Beverly Hillbillies, they had so much staying power. In reruns, they've lasted for decades now. And there's something about hitting a certain nerve, which was not entirely realistic. You could just call them a sitcom, but there was so much more than that because they came from an outlandish sort of premise.
Mm-hmm.
And
right. Especially like Green Acres, it's the fish out of water thing.
Yeah. So it's a very simple premise, and there had been a couple of shows before Green Acres and Beverly Hillbillies that had a very similar theme to them, but they just weren't nearly as. They were a little bit more dramatic and a little bit more taking a little bit more seriously. And with Beverly Hillbillies suddenly, or Gilligan's Island. Gilligan's Island is such a classic example, and I think you'd have to admit that it influenced modern day show. Well, not modern anymore, but more recent shows like Lost, or even the the reality show Survivor, right?
Mm-hmm. There was a late 90s a show on Nickelodeon for teens called Flight 51 Down, and it was the same thing.
Wow.
Just a bunch of.
I didn't see that, but that sounds interesting.
It was like a 15, 20 episode serial, but it's the same premise. It's a bunch of teenagers on a plane, got caught in a lightning storm, and they're on an island all by themselves trying to figure it out.
Right.
It was much more drama driven.
Sure.
It was teen angst on an island.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, there's something about that, the influence of the reality shows on, the soap opera format too. That has changed that a little bit. I think that people do take a lot of that more seriously than they used to. But which is funny, or like the Real World. When I think the thing for me too was just I really didn't like. I didn't like reality shows when that became the big thing,
right?
And it was really peaking, and it was all over the place. And as a writer or just a creator, just as an artist, what I really wanted to see was more the kind of stuff that was on when I was a kid. I wanted that kind of surrealistic, just funny art for art's sake kind of show. Right. And because that's when I started, was like 2007. So, or was that at 2009? Maybe I think possibly 2007. I'd have to look it up. But and there wasn't any sci-fi on either. I think the one show that everybody loves, Firefly, was on around that era.
And then I would guess Star Trek Next Generation was about that time too.
It was, it was in reruns by then. And,
okay.
Yeah. I think even Voyager maybe was done by then, or it's possible it was still on. But I just felt like science fiction had really lost its fun too, because, I love the original series and just how surreal that was. I feel like the original series has so much more to do with Twilight Zone than it did with any sort of like modern sci-fi that you could compare it to. It really, they took some pretty wacky premises and did that kind of what if, and it just went down that road. So Sig and I both we wanted to do that sort of a thing.
Okay.
Like I said, it was about 2007. I was looking at possibly going to film school, and film school, very, very expensive, especially out here in Los Angeles. I had done a little bit of film school in Chicago, but like on old Bolex cameras, like, silent,
Oh, really?
black and white. But, actually shot film and, and edited it together, with tape and.
I would say pre-digital stuff.
Yeah, pre-digital. And what was going on at that time was that digital was really, really just ramping up, and it was becoming cheaper, and it was becoming easier to do yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There were, I started out editing. Well, we started out editing, I think, in Premiere Pro, but I also would just use, the iMovie program that came with my
with my
iMac, and there are quite a few episodes, those early couple of seasons. That's what I edited the whole episode on, just on my iMac, just using the program that came with it, and really just pushing it to the limits of what it could do, to where it would start crashing or slowing down, or I'd start having problems, and
right.
And I have to go like, okay, that's it, I'm done editing. And, it's lucky that they were only like around 10 minutes, some of them were 7, some of them were 12, but they always kind of stayed in that time frame. But yeah, that was the thing. I wanted to go to film school. I couldn't afford it. And then I said to myself, I really don't want to go to film school. What I want to do is make a film. I want to make movies. And that's when my writing partner, Sig, said, well, what everyone does now is they make web series. And that really was true back then. There so many people had web series, and it was such a common thing, and it was still sort of the wild, wild west on the internet.
Now, was this like late 90s? Early 2000s?
No. Oh, yeah. No, yeah. This is the 2000s. So,
okay.
Yeah, because, YouTube was still a fairly new thing in the early 2000s.
I was going to say, I wasn't even culturally aware of YouTube until 04, 05-ish.
Somebody told me that it was actually the Janet Jackson halftime show where she did that very famous breast reveal.
Oh, the wardrobe malfunction.
Exactly. And that was what really catapulted YouTube, because people were saying, all the people who'd missed it were like, oh my God, I want to see this. You can't see it on the news. And it's like, well, it's on YouTube. And it was, and multiple people had put it up on YouTube. And so everyone was rushing to see it.
Bared soul.
Yeah. To see this, what really was mostly like kind of a very ornate big piece of nipple jewelry, if I remember correctly. But at the time it was very lascivious, and
I was gonna say that's kind of ironic. I don't know if it's ironic or just a commentary on American culture that YouTube was shot into stardom because of a bare breast.
It explains so much, though, right? I mean, it's still kind of like that, and it was never the perfect place even to be releasing a web series, but it was there, and it's an easy way to get people to see the show. I don't have to send them a tape. I don't have to,
right?
And the other thing is that it's all there for posterity. It has dates. It has, there's an archive that I can go to and I can look at, and
right. It's never lost. Yeah.
I can find out. Yeah. When sometimes after I've done a season, I have to go back to IMDb and enter some of the credits and the actors, and because generally for a show that's as under the radar as ours, nobody else is going to do that for you. You sit down and you do that yourself. So I can go back to YouTube and I can find the date that it aired, and refresh my memory of who was in it, and and do all that kind of stuff. So it's really handy in that regard, and that's really what helped the show take off. Then I just it was the right era for it, and going into it, I knew very, very little about editing video, or I didn't know anything about After Effects. It has a lot of very
it's pretty production. I mean, it's for a homemade thing. It's production heavy.
Yes,
It feels like. I mean,
yeah, it's and that was a big part of the fun of it. And like I said, I started off really kind of interested in animation and interested in visual effects. And so I wanted to kind of put a lot of that in if I could. And it was, it was a film school for me in a sense. And I did. I learned how green screen effects work, what makes a good effect work, what can really screw up your green screen if you're not paying attention, how to get good, just how to get good results. And so even as I was producing these episodes, I was also learning from it. And that was always kind of the idea. And I cast it with just friends, mostly from my acting class at the time. And I was taking this Meisner class with a friend of mine who's he's no longer in town, but he teaches Meisner now in Atlanta. Rob Mello is his name. And there were so many great people in this class, and I pretty much just cast it out of like the people that we knew. And so it was an opportunity for them as well to get not just experience, but to practice their craft.
Sure. Now, have you always wanted to get into film? I mean, because we met in a little bitty theater, a little bitty state college theater program, but it's always been film for you, or?
I think it always has been. Yeah. I do miss theater. I've always enjoyed doing theater, and I miss it now that I don't get to do it much anymore. But I think Star Wars was probably, like it was for a lot of people, it was this kind of, in the mid 70s, things were very, film especially was, it was not terribly uplifting. It was the era of the open ending, where you didn't even have to end a film on a high note necessarily. You could just sort of like start pulling the camera back and fade off into the credits. And, and so I don't want to say that it was all dismal. There were a lot of wonderful films made back then, but it was, that realism that you're talking about, that Mamet style realism of the grittiness of real life was very pervasive. And then so when Star Wars came out, and I mean, I was 10, 11, when it came out, it was just such it was such a game changer. It just blew me away. And made me start thinking of film and television in a whole different way. And so, from that point forward, I knew that I always think I knew I wanted to be an entertainer because I had a ventriloquist puppet prior
you
to
too?
that. Yeah. I've always loved puppets. I had, a magic set. I've always liked that kind of realm of creating illusion in a sense, because that's what puppets are as well. It's it's projecting that illusion and projecting that personality onto something else, and like a simple kind of animation in a way, even like a live animation.
Yeah, it always feels to me it's they're like animation and puppetry. They're always underutilized tools of communicating.
Absolutely. Well, and I think we're in an era right now where the digital is so effective that you see so much of it that I think people find puppets creepy, now.
Yeah, to a certain degree.
And especially like the younger generations now, they don't see the charm in it as much as we did when we were kids.
Now, I have to ask you this. Having been a puppeteer for a while, most of what I know comes out of the East Coast and the Sesame Street tradition and the Henson stuff.
Yeah.
And they famously call The West Coast puppeteers, a bunch of cable pullers.
Right.
Just simply because of the form factor. Because East Coast,
Yeah.
they work with foam and felt.
Yeah.
Hollywood works in latex steel and
Yes.
cable remotes and now servo motors and things like that.
Right.
So do you, and this comes from your comment that, some kids are jaded by puppetry and think it's creepy. Do you think that's a difference simply because West Coast, East Coast?
I don't know. That is a good question. I mean, yeah, we certainly a very realistic puppet. I think it has a lot to do with just the. Oh boy, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna blank on this for a second. There is that divide that they talk about between a human being and a robot, and there's a certain there's a certain gap where it's like the closer a robot or a puppet gets to looking like a human without actually quite being acceptable, the creepier it gets. There's something in our collective consciousness that says, someone acting like a human but not quite human is to be feared. And I don't know where that comes from exactly. But
that's an interesting, because it feels right to me. Because most of my experience with puppet is, fuzzy monsters and
right,
stuff that's nowhere near realism.
Right. And the farther you get away in that cute area, it's okay, and that doesn't bother
Right.
people per se. Yeah. But it's
but that makes sense. That the more human.
Yeah.
And
so
closer
ventriloquist dummies. Yeah.
Yeah. There are certain marionette artists. Yeah, there are certain marionette artists whose puppets are hyper realistic,
Right.
And they spend their careers trying to make them look hyper realistic, and they're off putting.
Right.
It's like, okay, yeah, I don't like that.
Yeah. It's an experiment that I've been thinking about going back to before we did our. There's one season of Space Hospital that's just animated, and we did it in a very sort of simple cookie cutter Hanna-Barbera kind of style that was,
right.
Maybe, I don't know, harkens back to something more like Johnny Quest or something.
I was going to say, because I saw a couple clips of your cast being animated, performing like the Archies in the musical montage kind of thing. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. That's lovely. I love that.
Oh, it was so much fun. But, one of the early tests, I had taken some much more sort of photorealistic drawings that our artist had done. Brett Snodgrass is the person who did all the character design for the cartoons, by the way. And he had done these sort of more like posters of more photorealistic versions of the cast. And I took those, and in the same way, I kind of cut them up and animated them. And the effect was, it was sort of creepy,
Interesting.
And because it's, you really want to pull back. And if you look at a lot of cartoons right now, I mean, especially something like The Simpsons or Bob's Burgers or any of the popular shows, it's like they look nothing like human beings. There's something about that element that, and even something like Archer, which, is at least they're more realistic drawings in a sense.
It's closer to correct anatomy.
It is, but it's still, they're avoiding like this, any kind of very heavy skin shading. It's all this still very, So I don't know. I've been interested in going back to that and seeing like just how weird you can make it. I've been doing a lot of animating during
how uncomfortable can you make your audience?
I guess, yeah. Well, I mean, it's at a certain point, it's like, I don't know if I'm ever going to sell this show, and I don't know how important it is to me to sell the show. I mean, I'm sure it'd be great to make money off of it, but at the same time, it is my art. And so to be able to have the freedom to do what I want and to not have to go to anyone and ask for permission to do it or run it by an audience first and see how they respond and take notes. it puts it in kind of a whole different light for me, where I still, even after all this time, I can still just experiment. And we had a pitch for the show really early on. I think we were only like in our first season or something like that. And I just remember it would have been great to sell the show at that time if we could have. But I remember in the back of my mind just going like, the show's not ready, and I'm not ready to let go of it and let it become some sort of corporate interest, that I don't have control of anymore. Because that was my fear of what it would become. At a certain point, and I think I've always been kind of reluctant that way to take it out and show it to people because it's so personal,
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Two questions. I mean, you still work on it on occasion. It's maybe not as in full production as it used to be.
No, yeah, but I've taken some time off from it recently. Yes,
but do you still consider it film school? Do you still consider it that place to go and learn and experiment and tinker?
It is. Yeah, it has been a little bit for me. I've been experimenting a little bit with, they have all of these apps now where you can just show your face and they'll animate your face for you and do different things, right? Mm-hmm. And I've been tinkering with that a little bit. And there's a thing that I'm working on right now, an episode that I'm working on that's going to be 100% animation. And it involves Lenny the Lovable Robot, who's a puppet. So it's an animation of a puppet.
Which sounds redundant, but
it seems weird, right? But it's fun. It's, and he's very easy to animate because it's pretty much just mouth open or closed and, head turns. But, it takes place. He's having, some sort of, I don't want to give too much away, but I mean, it's not like anyone's going to see it.
I'll make sure they see it.
Our viewership is not that high, but yeah, no, I would love for people to see it. It's he's living in sort of a Jetsons world, so it starts off as a kind of Jetsons cartoon, and he's very clearly in that world, and then it degrades into and goes into these other areas where it becomes a sort of a Muppet Babies parody at one point, and some other things, some other different styles of animation. And so, so for a lot of this, I've been experimenting with and just using these apps just off the shelf. This is not expensive equipment at all. It's just, It's literally just my phone and sending videos from my phone to my computer and dropping it in, dropping these animations in that I'm doing. And so, yeah, it continues. It's funny. I'm probably way behind the curve as far as what can be done with all of this technology, but I don't mind running behind and catching up and,
Oh yeah. No, it sounds very familiar. What you're saying feels very familiar, cause with the puppetry that I used to do, I wound up, I build props and weird stuff for other people, for other shows. Not necessarily puppets, but just, those weird things that you can't buy off the shelf or make yourself. But there's always new materials.
Yes.
And there's, the wonderful world of cosplay right now, and EVA foam and Warbler.
Certainly, yeah.
And thermoplast, I'd heard of them.
Right.
But this week I have to go out and buy my first roll of Warbler and play with it because somebody commissioned me to build a mask.
Right.
So I'm okay, let's go. But it's that same kind of feel where there's always something new to learn, and
there is. You're always learning. And once you start to feel familiar and comfortable where you are, that gives you that opportunity then to try something new and to just always keep growing.
But I think part of it too is part of my energy comes from finding new and better ways and looking for part of my energy and part of my drive is. And I don't know if you feel the same way, but that's part of the whole experience
No, absolutely. It really is for me. Yeah. And even just this show now that I've taken it to where it is. And I think it's already something that on some levels is maybe too esoteric for a lot of people. I don't want to say for the general public, because I don't know how it would do if it was really, genuinely viewed by a lot more people. I don't have the kind of money that you would need to promote it on that level. But, at the same time, like I said, it's always been this sort of deeply personal thing for me where I just take it in whatever direction I'm interested in. And that interest comes from, just learning what this new thing is, this new area is. And early on with my creative partner, that was a little bit trickier. There was an awful lot more collaboration of everyone kind of deciding together what we were going to do for those first couple of seasons. But, as time went on, I got more and more freedom and also just more and more responsibility where, my editor was sort of like, well, I don't want to edit any more of these. And why don't you edit them? And, and so I had to learn a lot of things just out of necessity, like After Effects, the program After Effects I use really heavily for the effects. And,
you also made a comment about, and you've made it several times actually, not wanting to sell this.
It's, it's like there's this subconscious, there's this subconscious part of me that feels like it's too personal. I have a hard time going out and telling somebody this is something you want to watch, because I'm really thinking to myself, this is something I want to watch. I literally created a show that I enjoy watching.
But isn't that the sign of a good director, though?
I hope so. I mean,
that's what I've been told. I don't know.
I can't say for sure, but I would like to think so. I mean, it is a matter of, finding the audience. And we have some very devoted fans who I'm sure would love to see more. I haven't put out an episode since last year. And last year there were a couple of episodes that were still just in the can that we had shot, and I still needed to finish because, my second son came along, and he's about to turn 7 now, but back when he was 3-4 years old, he was diagnosed with autism, and that became a situation where I had to kind of slow down on my art a little bit and just put a lot more your
focus
my time
changed,
and focus into that. But as he continues to do well in school and as he grows, I'm getting a little bit more space to be able to go back to my art. And so now I'm really trying to figure out what this next iteration of the show is going to be, whether it's going to continue to just be the same thing or if it can become something else now, because I have that freedom.
Right. Now I'm curious to know, I read a book, I don't know, a few years ago. Somebody had done their dissertation about Jim Henson's art.
Yeah.
And this person came to the conclusion that Jim Henson was very good at creating 2 types of artwork, one for himself and one to sell.
Right.
So he was very good at that. So his early days in his college doing his stuff for his local television station was for himself, just to be fun and experiment. But then he was asked to build something for Sesame Street, which he didn't want to sell because, again, like yourself, it was new and wonderful and very near and dear to his heart. But then after that, he realized that, and after I forget the timeline on it, but eventually the Sesame Street Workshop asked if they could license the characters because they were having trouble raising money. And Henson hemmed and hawed and like, do I not do it? He eventually said yes, but he wanted full. Anyway, long story short, he got to the point now where he did things like the Muppet Show for money.
Right.
He did certain things for Sesame Street Workshop for money. He did commercials for money.
Right.
But that money let him do his crazy weird films.
Right.
Like Labyrinth and
Dark Crystal.
Those.
Right.
Yeah. So do you, and this long, obnoxious explanation, is Space Hospital strictly for you, for love? And is there something else down the pipeline maybe for money? Or is this?
That's a good question. I mean, learning all the skills that I did in After Effects and Premiere Pro, and I mean, I'm naming a bunch of Adobe products right now, but having had that experience really made it possible for me to make money in other ways. So the editing that I'm doing right now is for real hospitals. There's a chain of Dignity hospitals here in Southern California that a friend of mine who actually was the original Dr. Good in the first and second season of Space Hospital. He had to take a break from acting to raise his kids. He was a little ahead of me in that curve, and that's part of why he left the show. But in that time too, he developed as a photographer. He became a headshot photographer, and now he's shooting a lot of video. And he goes out and he shoots videos, like these internal videos for these hospitals. He also does some political work, and I do the editing for him. And so, in a sense, it did become a film school because I learned the skills necessary to make money working in video, and that's been, especially during the pandemic, that it was a really big help because I couldn't go anywhere and build anything, which is the other thing that I do is carpentry. And most productions were shut down. There was very little work out there, but these hospitals needed to do these internal videos, especially because so many people were staying home and they couldn't have big gatherings where they would, or big meetings. And so they wanted to get a lot of information across through video. And so that really started to become a big, I don't want to say an industry, but he started getting a lot of work out of it. And I started getting a lot of work editing for him. And so it was a real lifesaver for me. We needed that extra money for sure, just getting through the pandemic. And, so that's been my last couple of years too. And I mean, I feel like these last 2 years have really, there's like it's an era. It's a very short era where things changed like tremendously.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's part of why I'm really still just kind of left reeling, trying to figure out what it is, what Space Hospital was before and what it has been since, or what it potentially could be now. I feel like there's a separation there, and times have changed, and it's, I'm not necessarily interested in doing exactly the same show. And even as far as selling it, it is very, it's very much a part of that sort of early, that era is very 60s, 70s, maybe early 80s in terms of kitsch and nostalgia and themes. And, with younger generations, I don't know that they even connect to that kind of stuff. So it's like whether or not the show would have any legs in a larger audience, I don't know. I guess I'm suspicious that it wouldn't. But
because I get it. I mean, I watch it and I see, I think I see every reference.
Yeah, I think attempted. So. And I think a lot of people our age do. And that's, again, it was for me. It was for me and Sig. It was our humor. It was what we wanted to do. And when we started it 10, 15 years ago, there were still plenty of people who sort of got it. But I think you sort of, we're seeing a big shift in, they want to make television for 13 to 30-year-olds, especially. And, I don't know that what I'm doing necessarily, appeals to that.
And not being in that demographic, I think.
Yeah, it's hard to even understand.
Yeah, my learning curve is really slow on that one.
Yeah.
As well.
But at the same time, Space Hospital did definitely. I was inspired by the internet, and I love memes, and I love that kind of referential humor and meta humor. And I feel like all that stuff is still pretty big. It's a pretty big part of this culture. So
I think communicating like that, in that, like you said, that meta and that that postmodern kind of way,
Yeah.
I think is very much part of our.
Well, and I think after the Trump era, it's almost a sort of post-ironic era, which is, I mean, and I've felt that way for a while. It's sort of, things that were considered sort of funny prior to that, I feel like are not as funny anymore because you really have so many people kind of going off the deep end. Like the farther the divide in our country becomes, the more you have people just absolute science deniers.
Right. The more
it's
ludicrous
hard. Yeah. So it's like, I don't know. How can you, it's hard. It's almost hard to be funny in that kind of environment because there's, you're worried somebody out there is going to take you seriously,
Yeah.
It's not exactly that, but it's sort of that, it's that kind of uncertainty.
Right. When so many of the conversations are so ludicrous
Yeah.
to somebody's ears and so
Absolutely
hardcore for real in somebody else's ears.
Yeah. Right. And like all of the male characters of Space Hospital, so pompous and speaking such gobbledygook and all this sort of like double speak, management speak and stuff like that. It suddenly it became not as funny during the Trump era. And certainly a lot of the sort of sexual humor, which was all absolutely in good fun, suddenly did not seem appropriate anymore to me.
I was just going to ask you that after this conversation because one of your characters is the kind of Spock-esque alien with the head.
Yeah.
The head cat. I can't think of the name.
He has an alien symbiote that's sort of attached to his head, and he shares. It really sort of takes over the personality. So Omicron is the alien that he wears on his head. Yeah.
Yeah, but the character is just hornier than all get out.
Yeah.
At least in the few episodes that I watched.
A lot of the characters are. It's funny.
He stands out though.
I like to think of it as sort of sex positive because to me, well, a lot of it had to do with the original series and that era. But the 60s and 70s television was very sex positive, and there was an awful lot of, there was
true.
There was a Love Boat, and there was,
Captain Kirk
Captain Kirk, having sex with all of the alien women. And, I think that was part of what I was trying to convey. And, and also just, being a kid in that era and having things around like Playboy magazine or, all this, I don't want to say fetishy, but it's the elaborate underwear that women wore. It's hard to look back on that now as anything but sort of fetishy. It was all this sort of scaffolding to hold your body into particular,
right. And I think of,
positions.
Like you said, television, like Three's Company, where half of it was sexual innuendo. And
so
the norms were very different.
And so, a lot of the humor comes from sexual innuendo. But again, then as the era kind of changed and got, and prior, well, really, it was just during the Trump era and the Me Too era. And I really had to take a hard look at myself and the humor that I was producing too, and try to, is it being dismissive towards sexual impropriety? Is it, am I, is this humor, is it really funny, or is there something about it that seems misogynistic? These, I had to really, I really had to put the brakes on at that point. And it had a lot to do with just the way that the society was reacting, I think, to some of the revelations that were going on.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment. I mean, I have two daughters, and they're in their early 20s. Mm-hmm. And they are very much a product of the last 20 years, the last 10 years, and how they view that kind of humor
right.
is very different. And they represent what you're talking about in the sense that a lot of people are looking at that old school sexual humor as not humor.
Right. Well, even to have a show at this point where the not all the main characters, but some of the main characters are just white men, which to me was always, that was kind of the joke. To me, I was making fun of that culture. But again, it's a somewhat post-ironic era that we're living in, where it's like it's not enough to just portray somebody like that as a buffoon, because that's still kind of fun in a way. You could portray Trump as a buffoon, and people could still also be like, "Oh, but he's all right, isn't he?" Or Archie Bunker, or Stephen Colbert, even when he had that show, the Colbert Report, and he played that character who he's very, very conservative.
That Republican talking head character.
Yeah, but on one hand, you have liberals going like, "Oh, isn't he ridiculous? It's so funny that people could think that way." But on the other hand, you still have ultra conservatives who are able to say, "Well, it's kind of funny because it's true, though, isn't it?" You're really
right.
So you might think that you're making a statement, but are you really? Or and I don't know if Stephen Colbert felt like he was making a valuable statement or not, but I assume that he did. I assume that to him it was just all about making fun of that mode of thinking, that ultra conservative mode.
Right.
But
yeah,
but I don't know,
Yeah, it's a new world.
It is, and it's a different, it's a different way to navigate. But I have been thinking about moving more into animation. I think Space Hospital may become a fully animated show, and that might give me a little bit more control in terms of just making sure that I'm hitting all the right notes, and because I do want to avoid offending people. Honestly, just in this era where people are so easily offended, there's part of me that wants to kind of embrace that and say, well, let's see if we can work within those parameters,
Right. Do you think taking Space Hospital to an animated version and taking it farther away from the humanity will make it easier to make your point, or to
certainly, yeah, I think so, because then I think it becomes more absurd automatically, and that is something that Americans. You'll meet plenty of Americans who love Monty Python, and who love Red Dwarf or Doctor Who, but the majority of Americans, I think, don't necessarily get those realms. It's so much easier in Great Britain, for whatever reason, they understand the absurd way of approaching those things in live action. In America, I think you make it animated, and then it automatically it takes away that.
It gives you permission to laugh at it, regardless of what it is.
Exactly.
It's interesting. It almost feels like America has to be so absurd.
Yeah.
Before we'll take it as absurd.
Right.
And maybe I'm generalizing, maybe I'm reading into something, but...
Well, I'm remembering the reference that I was talking about before, of real versus unreal. And it's called Uncanny Valley. I'm sure you've heard of this.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
And it is this, if you're seeing it in a graph, it is basically, it goes up and up and up and up towards more realistic, and then you hit this huge dip where if you get too realistic without reaching the appearance of human, it becomes creepy as heck,
Yeah.
And that's the uncanny valley. And in a sense, I think there's a kind of uncanny valley that happens between animation and live action too, where we're willing to accept things in animation that we don't necessarily want to see in live action.
I would vote puppetry too. I can get away with stuff.
Right.
With puppets that would not.
Right.
If I did it for real, it just wouldn't, for lots of reasons, it just wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Okay, last few questions here. We're gonna keep going.
Sure.
What about your art turned you on?
Oh man, a good day. I wake up with ideas, and makes me want to get up out of bed. If I don't wake up with a lot of great ideas, sometimes I don't want to get out of bed, and I have to drag myself out. But I don't know. Like I think sometimes I dream about it. Like just ideas will pop into my head in the morning, and I suppose the thing about Space Hospital, especially, is that it's the idea of outer space, which, if we're looking at it sort of realistically and logically, is a really sort of cold, dark, boring, slow reality in a sense. We we don't know if there's other life out there, but we certainly aren't going to find it anytime soon.
Right.
The reality of something like the International Space Station, and muscle atrophy and not breathing stale air and all those sort of things are, I think, are not actually all that fun. But to me, that metaphor of outer space exploration is really, it's more about inner space exploration. It's really more about just exploring the human condition and exploring our human understanding of the world. And I think it's not just the one, it's sort of the two things that really turn me on. The idea that there's a mirror there, and that traveling into outer space, especially in a show, a lot of those '60s shows was really about traveling into inner space, because you had an era of psychedelics, for example, of people, trying to go inward to kind of figure out why we're all here and what this all is and what it all means, but to discover themselves more and that kind of thing. And that's a big, vague thing. It's not like it's specific, but that's one of the things that really turns me on about Space Hospital, is that kind of realm.
Oh, that's a brilliant answer.
Oh, thank you.
Anything about it turn you off?
Sitting at a computer for hours and hours animating is tough. And one of the things I liked about live action, when I was doing that more, was getting out, seeing friends, because, and the
Right.
collaboration, going places, building things with my hands, shopping for costumes. This is all stuff that turned me on. But what turns me off about it is then sitting in hours and hours editing, hours and hours animating
job.
Effects, that sort of stuff. Yeah. It's just, it does get tedious, and my butt gets big.
My oldest is a sound engineer.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's a lonely job editing sound.
Absolutely. Yes.
She hates the hours of loneliness, but she loves the work. Anyway, that's another podcast.
Oh, certainly. Are you going to interview her? Because that sounds wonderful.
She's on. Yeah. If I can catch her,
she'll pencil you in, see if she's got time.
Yeah, we live in the
you.
same house, but it's easier to talk to you than to her some days.
I've got a 14-year-old. I know exactly what you mean. Very similar.
Is there another art form that you have never attempted or dabbled in that you would like to?
Oh my goodness.
These are my Actor Studios questions.
I think I wish I could dance, but I really don't want to learn to dance. I just sort of wish that I could. And I don't even know if that's a completely honest answer, but to me, it seems like the farthest away from everything that I do. That it's sort of something expressive with my body, because I'm such an awkward person, and I've never been able to, when I've had to learn dance steps, back when I was doing musicals and things like that, I would learn the step and then I would slowly forget it the more I did it. Instead of getting better, I would get worse. So I wish I could dance. I don't know.
That's funny. Any art form you would never want to try?
Oh boy. I feel like I've tried most of them, honestly. I mean, I've painted and I draw and I sculpt and I yeah, I've done so many different mediums and
And you don't have to come up with an answer if you don't
yeah,
have one yet.
I don't think I have one. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think, I feel like there isn't anything. Again, it would be dance. So dance is going to be my answer for both of those, I think. Yeah.
I would love to know, but I ain't going for it.
Yeah.
Okay. Absolute last question.
Okay.
Where can we see some of your art?
Well, most of my art is in the form of Space Hospital, which you can find just by doing a very simple search on YouTube for Space Hospital, or sometimes even just in Google, it'll come up, although it might not be the absolute first thing to come up. But here, I'm looking at my screen right now.
Well, if I find the links, can I put them in the descriptors?
Oh, you certainly can. Yeah, let's do that. I've got a direct link to my page on YouTube.
Yeah, just send me that and I'll put it in the
that sounds
in the
wonderful. And that would be where most of it is. I would like to put out some sort of a portfolio or something at some point of other things I've done, set construction and props that I've made for other shows. But that's one of those projects that it just keeps getting pushed back and I haven't done.
Right.
But really, I mean, Space Hospital is that's my love. That's my main art, and it really encompasses. I did the sets for it. I did the costumes. I did a lot of the writing. Did most of the writing. I did a lot of the directing, and sculpting, puppeting. Building props. Just everything that I love. I was able to do on that show. So it's all there.
Yeah, and like I said, I haven't seen all of it, but what I have seen is just, it's marvelous, and I can see how it's so near and dear to your heart.
Well, thank you very much for saying that. It's wonderful to get that kind of feedback because it is a labor of love, and like I said, I cast so many friends in it too that it's become a kind of time capsule where I can go back and look at look at these different eras, even over the last 15 years, and that's marvelous. And see the show grow, and see my friends grow, and think like, oh, this is before Adriana had a kid. There's the two actresses. Well, you're supposed to say actor now, but Adriana Rose and the woman who plays Nurse Ratney, and then the woman who plays Barbara Arbra, they both were pregnant during the filming of the show. So you actually get to see them. Some of the time they've got pads on, but some of the episodes, they are literally just pregnant. So
did you write it into the show, or are they just showing up there?
Yeah, in one case, I think I wrote it into the show. Nurse Ratney was always supposed to be pregnant from the beginning. For whatever reason, she was pregnant in like the second episode, and we just decided to make that her thing. I don't know why, but so she would just always be pregnant. And
that's funny.
But then, yes, Barbara Arbra was the actress got pregnant during the filming, and we just wrote it into the show so that she could be on it, and it became a rivalry between her and Nurse Ratney because that's Ratney's thing. And
even better.
So many of the episodes are really just written around who was available at the time, anything that they wanted to do. We really just tried to keep it fun for everybody, and where we were shooting, things like that. And I think the show's a little uneven. The trickiest thing about it was that to have a successful web series, they were suggesting that you be putting stuff out like weekly. And I think the closest we ever got to that was maybe putting out one episode a month, maybe.
Right.
And that was a tremendous amount of work, even just for a 10-minute episode, because of the nature of the show.
But you see the work, and I can see, yeah. I mean, unless you've got a studio where everything can stay set up.
Right. Yeah. Which we didn't. Yeah.
Because you've got sets, you got hidden puppeteers.
Yeah.
You got fun effects. Oh, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
How you got one a month out is beyond me. Because they're fun. And they're, like I said, they're great production value and a lot of fun.
Thanks so much for saying that. Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. I really do. I wish I'd known about it sooner.
Yeah,
I'm going to show my daughters.
I'm really bad about getting the word out, but I probably need to be getting the word out more now, especially since we're in a bit of a lull right now. It's probably a good time to be doing a little bit more advertising, I guess, or promotion, I should say.
Well, I will do my best from my end.
Wonderful, thank you.
On the show here. We are a little over an hour, so I am going to say thank you very much for spending your morning with me. This is, first of all, it's lovely to get to talk to you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you again, Mike. It's been so long.
Thanks for hanging around and geeking out with us. If you enjoyed the show, hit the like and subscribe buttons. And more importantly, join the conversation and leave us a message or comment. We'd love to hear about your nerdy art. Thanks again, and join us next week for more Art Nerds.